Open Space Commission meeting to order for August 28th, 2023. Robert, roll call.
Yep, Commissioner Wilson,
Here.
Commissioner Atlas,
Here.
Commissioner Norton, he is not present. Commissioner Fox,
Here.
Commissioner Thomas, not present at the moment. I think she'll be joining us in a few minutes. Commissioner Wallen is not present. Commissioner White here. And Councilmember Representative Deborah Harris, not present.
That we'll move on to the land acknowledgement statement. The Flagstaff Open Spaces Commission humbly acknowledges the ancestral homelands of this area's indigenous nations and original stewards. These lands, still inhabited by native descendants, border mountains sacred to indigenous people. We honor them, their legacies, their traditions, and their continued contributions. We celebrate their past, present, and future generations who will forever know this place as home. And next is the approval of the July 24th meeting minutes. Is there any discussion or corrections to the minutes as they were written? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to approve? I'll make a motion to approve. Do I hear a second? Second. Commissioner Appling seconds it. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved. And public participation. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on any subject that is not scheduled before the commission on this day. The Arizona open meeting law prohibits the commission from discussing or acting on an item which is not listed on the prepared agenda. Commission members may, however, respond to criticism made by those addressing the commission, ask staff to review a matter, or ask that a matter be placed on a future agenda. To address the commission on an item that is on the agenda, please wait for the chair to call for public comment at the time the item is heard. Is there anyone here from the public that wishes to speak on a subject that's not on the agenda for tonight? Hearing and seeing none, we will move on to our business items. The first one up is the Sun Corridor Trail Partnership. This is a informational and a discussion action.
Hi, I'm Serena from Trails Inspire. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thanks so much for having me come to speak to your group. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I'm going to do a quick introduction to the Sun Corridor Trail, and we'll have some discussion and questions afterwards.
Okay.
And presentation coming up for everybody?
No.
Yes?
No.
I'm sorry, I can't hear anybody.
We're still waiting. Yeah, the presentation hasn't popped up yet.
Oh, it hasn't popped up yet. Okay. Let me see.
There we go.
How about now? Okay. You know, technology and all that. Well, thanks so much for being patient with me. I am representing the Sun Corridor Trail Alliance Trail Towns program, and we've also got Dig Studio, who's doing some work with us for route finding. And so I'd like to talk about the Sun Corridor Trail and Flagstaff and our Trail Towns program. So our agenda objectives are information and allowing you to ask questions about the project, and then also to explain how the SCTA would like to proceed from a marketing and academic development aspect, partnering with Flagstaff as a trail town. So I'll do a little trail history and then benefits of trail towns, talk about our Arizona Office of Tourism grant, go over our trail overview and concept routes. Then Dig Studio will talk about how we are creating those routes, talk about trail partnerships, concept to reality next steps, and discussion and questions. So here you can see an overview map of the Sun Corridor Trail. The yellow dotted lines are concept. The red are open. As you can see, most of the open pieces are loop trails like the one around Flagstaff. So the history of the Sun Corridor Trail actually started on a napkin. It was one of those trail conferences in 2013, and Steve Anderson from Pima County and RJ Carden from Maricopa County, they actually, like, they were having beers afterwards, started drawing stuff on a napkin, realized that they were both creating loop trails around their jurisdictions. And then they saw that Maricopa and Pima counties could be connected through Pinal County by the Central Arizona Project Trail. So this led to the idea of the Sun Corridor Trail and looking at opportunities to connect existing and potential loop trails to the north and south. The trail is a concept and it's a work in progress through a multi-agency effort led by county, city, state, and federal entities in partnership with the nonprofit Sun Corridor Trail Alliance. We are working right now with a $250,000 Arizona Office of Tourism grant to develop the route, a trail town program, and marketing plan. And one thing that's great is just, to have the support of the Arizona Office of Tourism on this project. And I'll talk a little bit more about why they're so interested. So when complete, it will extend approximately 1,500 miles from the Mexican border in Douglas, Arizona, and Cochise County to Las Vegas, Nevada. It'll connect 9 counties and over 40 cities or towns. And of those cities or towns, 23 of them are located in rural areas of Arizona. It will include loops around cities, metropolitan areas along the route, including Tucson, Phoenix, Prescott, Sedona, Flagstaff, Kingman, and Las Vegas. And when Dig Studio does their presentation, they'll talk a little bit more about how they're finding those routes. So what we're looking at is a credit card trail, and most people haven't heard of this concept. It's very popular it's very popular internationally and also on the East Coast, but not so much on the West Coast yet. And this credit card touring, there's a website, creditcardbiketouring.com. The idea is to travel light and fast by bike, getting food, lodging, and supplies along the way, as opposed to traditional touring where everything is carried. So if you think of like somebody all loaded up to go bike packing with panniers and things like that, that is on the opposite end of the spectrum. So what we're looking at is to, based on this idea of this credit card trail. So the idea is you can just swoop into town with your credit card, get what you need, not have to carry things on your back. And so efforts are being made to determine the route so that trail users can bike from town to town each day, trying to get within 30 to 40 miles a day. And the ideal bike type is a gravel bike, and most of the Sun Corridor Trail will be on dirt. However, parts of the loop in Tucson are paved. Hiking, running, and limited equestrian use will also be promoted on the Sun Corridor Trail. And the way that this differs from the Arizona Trail, and I actually developed the Arizona Trails Gateway Community Program, which includes Flagstaff, of course. So that's a backcountry trail, and that is more remote. This concept is an urban front country trail that also travels through rural areas. So trail towns, they give trail users places to eat and stay, stores for supplies and gear, nearby attractions to enhance your visit, and then credit card trail access to resources rather than a backcountry experience. And trail towns benefit because businesses see more customers associated with the trail. There's economic development through tourism dollars, sustainability, and familiarity with the trail leads to spreading the word, which brings more trail users, and it gives opportunities for residential access to recreational benefits of being outdoors. One thing that's nice about doing a presentation for Flagstaff is that you're already on board. You know exactly how important it is to be a trail town and a hub of recreation for a number of different things. And so you understand how important it is to have this support for trail users and how that can affect your town and your economy. Some of the materials that we've developed is a rat card that can be put in visitor centers, bike shops, outdoor stores, some stickers, and we're working on our website. That's an ongoing process. You can order materials and get more information at suncorridortrail.org. Go through some of the existing and planned trail segments, starting with the Chuck Huckleberry Loop in Tucson. It's 131 miles of multi-user trail that circles the Tucson area and extends to unincorporated Pima County, Marana, Oro Valley, and South Tucson. It was completed in 2018, and it's voted Best Recreational Trail by USA Today for the second year in a row in 2022. So to get from the Douglas, the Mexican border at Douglas up to the Tucson area, the Pima County, a combination of the concept of combination of rails to trails. This is some of the areas that we're looking at. But again, this is just a concept. It hasn't been ground truth yet. Maricopa County has the existing Maricopa Trail, which is complete. It's 315 miles and it encompasses the Phoenix metropolitan area. And the Sun Circle Trail is the original 128-mile metropolitan loop that shares a portion of the Maricopa Trail loop. Pinal County has the Central Arizona National Recreational Trail, which parts of it are complete and parts of it are in the process of being completed. That goes through Pinal County, connecting the loop in Tucson with Maricopa Trail in the Phoenix area. Got the Prescott Circle Trail, which is complete, 54 miles long, and then the Peavine Trail connects Prescott with the Chino Valley to the north. Flagstaff Loop Trail, you're all very familiar with that one. And then here's some of the ideas that Las Vegas is exploring. Las Vegas is going through a little reorganization of their outdoor recreation bureau, and so we'll be working with them more in the future. So some of the partnership deliverables that we would like to offer as a Trail Town partnership would be some of the current ones would be promotion and branding as Sun Corridor Trail Towns. Presence on the Sun Corridor Trail website, where we have Trail Town's specific page in development, and that will have links to local resources. Inclusion in social media campaigns and newsletters. Developing partnerships with local businesses and highlighting them on the website, on signage and promotional materials. And for the future, we'd like to have the Trail Towns include and participate in economic impact studies, develop individual Trail Town maps with local businesses and services, Trail Town signage and community information at kiosks to encourage trips into town. And the benefits include improvements in the economy, increased stewardship, and health of residents and visitors. One of the things that I'd like to put out there is if we did enter into an agreement with the city of Flagstaff, what that would look like. And we can, like I said, this is just starting the discussion, informational, to give you an idea of where we're coming from. Here are some of our partners and working groups all across the counties and into Nevada. And I'm going to have Dig Studio take over now with a presentation about how they are determining the route.
All right, thanks, Serena. I'm going to turn it over to Danielle in just a second. Can everybody hear me okay? All right, just as sort of a setup. So part of what we're looking at is we're looking at every variety of road and trail that really link everything from Flagstaff back over to Lake Havasu. So we're looking at everything from forest roads, forest trails, urban utility easements, historic railroad beds, of course, abandoned portions or even current portions of the Route 66. So we're looking at all those pieces right now. So we're looking at a number of different alternatives, and we're currently doing what I call a windshield tour. We can access most of these different trails or roadways by, basically vehicle, even though it's sometimes could be a little rough. So we're going through that whole scenario now. And then we are coming up with sort of a sorting of maybe desirable routes, but we're also finding some pretty good sized gaps in the areas, especially when we run up into railroads or the I-40 in different areas. But again, we're trying to really look at this thing from a credit card trail standpoint and trying to utilize really existing roads or trails that are out there today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Danielle. She's done a really good job of kind of sorting, but she'll go through sort of the methodology as we identify these trails and basically these, I should say, corridors or whichever way we're going to actually go between each one of the cities. Danielle, you want to take it away?
Yeah, thank you, Jay. Are you all able to see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So just a quick little overview of the area we're talking about here is really between Flagstaff and Lake Havasu. Here in the orange, you can see in this window is the area that Jay's explaining, that we are looking at all different sorts of routes and a diversity of surface types when it comes to roads and trails. We worked with NAU students and Frank Vernon over at NAU to compare some of our selection criteria on how we're determining some of these roads and trails. So a quick overview of some research you all may already be fairly familiar with. Two NAU students who Frank has been working with for the past few years have been out ground truthing and doing field research on Forest Service roads and trails around the Flagstaff area. The first of those is Adam Smat, and his approach originally was really this wide net approach. He was able to go out and just ride a lot of trails and roads, being both an avid cyclist and being in close proximity to the area allowed him to go out and pretty much just create this inclusion and exclusion criteria. So depending on the road type, roads were either included or excluded based on whether or not they could be bikeable, what the grade was, the seasonality of it, if there was a speed limit and it was shared with cars, and also getting into land management, looking only at private roads, of course, staying out of wilderness areas and off of private roads, was his original take on both the inclusion and exclusion criteria for that. And after Adam was done with his report, the following student was Cameron Cotner, who went in and kind of refined and funneled down Adam's research and created a rating system for how those roads that were before excluded and also the ones that were included could be, instead of just added or subtracted from the data set, could be rated on a 1 to 5 rating scale to be able to get a little bit more information of those trails and rate how bikeable they were. He also brought in some new considerations looking at aesthetics and points of interest and the physical demand and the number of dismounts. And we were given both Adam and Cameron's reports, but we had asked at Dig Studio going into the research that we didn't want to see their trail alignments that they had chosen, just to eliminate some of the bias of the trail selection. Now, given that we're down in the Phoenix area, we took a bit of a different approach. We couldn't cast this wide net, and we wanted to be able to do some initial qualitative and quantitative research using geospatial data before going out and doing field research. So what we did was we took some psychological theory around risk and needs and used that to base some of our choices around the trail, given what we knew of the Trail Alliance wanting to create this idea of a credit card tourism trail. So knowing that recreationalists would want to be traveling no more than really 30 miles a day, we started with essential services. So food and lodging, if people are not carrying these with them when they're hiking or biking and are ideally looking to stop at places to eat and stop at places to stay, we wanted to create a buffer or bubble around all of the inventory we could find between Flagstaff and Lake Havasu to see if it was, first of all, even possible to link these essential services together along a route between lodging such as hotels and glamping and food from restaurants, convenience stores, and grocery stores. Our inventory started to produce these two routes of both a stem trail to the north and to the south, linking Flagstaff to Lake Havasu. And getting into kind of this hierarchy of needs, the next thing we started to look at after those physiological needs, essential services were met, we started to look at the accessibility of the trails. So in that layer of data research, we looked at road and surface types, which trails supported the most number of users, wanting it to be a multi-use trail. Looking at elevation gain and loss when we had information on that data, and trail technicality. Safety, it was also considered in terms of shared roads and trails, whether OHV was allowed on the trails, seasonality, and cell phone reception. And then lastly, kind of working up Maslow's hierarchy of needs, the last thing that we took into consideration were these points of interest, kind of linking both cultural and natural features to the stem of the trail, looking at the distances to see if there were offshoots that we wanted to consider or loops to be able to bring it back to this backbone of the trail itself. After our initial research, we met again with NAU and combined both our methodology for trail selection criteria as well as NAUs. And we're in the process of developing a refined trail selection criteria that we'll use for our field research to be able to collect more qualitative data when we have researchers in the field riding some of these trails. So what we've done so far is through this step one process is that in-office research. And as Jay alluded to, we've moved into the windshield view of our layer of research where Jay's actually been out and riding some of these trails and gravel roads and primitive native surface roads. Along the north route, we've both through open source rider data and what our team has done through the windshield view, we've accessed about half of the trail, and we've found that there's some unique opportunities when we look at both utility easements, when looking at some of these pipeline corridors, as well as some of the gravel roads to the north. And on the south end, we've have done a bit less because it is a bit more technical getting out of Flagstaff, trying to leave near Roberts Lake, and actually found some impassable areas when it gets into seasonality and some pretty heavy rains. And so we've gone into a second layer of refinement, and Jay was able to just go out this last weekend and explore a little bit more. So we went back in and looked at all of what paved roads are in that Forest Service land, linking Flagstaff to Williams, and removing any of the native surfaces because of the heavy rainfall and the muddy roads that were going to be out there this last weekend. We wanted to keep him off of those roads. So only looking at gravel roads in the Forest Service land, but then as we move west towards Lake Havasu, some of that information we don't have. We just know whether they're paved or unpaved. So trying to stay on roads that were very more well-known and ridden more by other users, as well as really exploring these utility easements and abandoned railways. There's a couple photos here of some opportunities that Jay found on this last weekend when exploring some of these abandoned railways and utility easements. And Jay, did you want to touch base a little bit more on that
Yeah,
as I
just
wrap it up?
real quickly. Yeah, so what we found, and I think one of the things we first started out was obviously just finding sort of the gravel road routes. And through going through our analysis, we came across a couple of the things. One is Danielle mentioned sort of the gas line corridors that, have been in. Some have been in for some time, some are recently installed. And really almost like park-like environments. And also they're not heavily used by ATVs. There's also a forest road designation on top of those. So obviously each one of these will have to go into not only ground truthing, but also easement agreements with either utility or landowners. But then one other item that we really came across this last weekend, going from Williams back over all the way to Seligman, is the abandoned railroad easements, which may be a really good alternate, mainly because the way they were constructed were there to be there for some time. And they have a cinder surface, plus I think the years of oil coming off the engines, they're pretty much vegetation free. So what you see on the right is actually Johnson Tunnel, which is an historic tunnel that we could only go so far, and then we had to hike in about 2 more miles to get to it. But it's actually in pristine condition. And so, like I said, there's some really good opportunities as we start looking at these different these routes to really start exploring, what may make what I would consider a national and recognized trail, especially in some of these historic and cultural features. So as we go through, we know that, that our one route, and the reason why we're not selecting just one route, but we'll probably have at least 2 routes, if not 3 routes that we're identifying. And that's mainly because we know we have to go through sort of the agreements and easements and negotiation to hopefully actually make these things, become a reality. But like I said, right now it's pretty interesting, the areas between Flagstaff, and so far we've gotten to Seligman, and it takes probably much a full day to even look at about 15 miles. So it's like I said, it's a little bit time consuming, but what we're finding is some people that are very interested in their communities, but also just share a wealth of knowledge about some of these historic features and some of these historic trailways. So Danielle, I don't know if there's anything else to finish up with, but otherwise we can turn it over to Brandon maybe to talk a little bit about the National Park Service grant that basically for the NAU students.
Yeah, so we'll continue the roundtable here. My name is Brandon Stockstill. I'm a community planner with the National Park Service. I'm in the Rivers, Trails, and Conservation Assistance Program, or RTCA, and essentially we're the community assistance arm of the Park Service. I'm based out of our Salt Lake City office, but help do conservation and recreation planning throughout the Western U.S. I've been working with the Sun Corridor Alliance since the fall of 2019, helping them get organized and started. I helped them develop their bylaws and nonprofit, and then worked with them in developing their first MOU that occurred at the state or at the county level between the various counties and a couple of state agencies that a potential Sun Corridor trail would run through. I'm continuing to work with them, helping them to organize and administer the different grants and sub-consultants that you've heard today, as we continue to do the next round of trail planning, bringing this concept from the 30,000 foot level down to the 10,000 foot level. As part of that, as Serena talked about, we're looking at developing this MOU with various cities and towns that the trail would run through. And so our hope is that we've been able to share some of the benefits of that today, and we can answer any questions that you have. To follow up with Jay's work that's been going on at Dig Studio, we're entering into another round of funding with NAU to provide them with 2 years of funding for undergraduate students to continue this trail ground truthing and to continue to refine our trail selection criteria. So I'll be working with NAU over the next 2 years in conjunction with the Sun Corridor Alliance to continue this ground truthing and refinement, not only through Northern Arizona, but really continuing throughout the state. So we're interested in seeing this succeed in the long run. I think the Sun Corridor Alliance has developed a number of good partnerships to be successful in this, and our hope is that we can be a strength to the community and provide this new, unique recreational experience in Arizona and throughout the West. So I guess with that, any questions for any of us?
Commissioners, is there any questions that we have for them right now?
Go ahead, Ken. A comment, I appreciate that this is great. Provides a whole different type of recreation as far as bikes and hiking, running. As compared to the, everything on your back. That's this idea of the credit card touring, I think is great, especially for the older folks as they get older. But I was really interested because 30 years ago, a small group from NAU and myself tried to get interest in that abandoned railroad from Williams to Ashport that goes through Johnson Tunnel. And the reason I bring it up is not because we were looking at it 30 years ago, but because what we ran into. And what we ran into is it's been abandoned for a long time. Ranchers have gotten used to it being abandoned. And they were quite concerned that if you developed a trail, then ATVs would come in and then they would go and cut the fences and all that kind of stuff. So that's just a heads up on that. But on the other side of the coin, it would be a wonderful link. There's been a lot of archaeology done around the Johnson Tunnel area, the historic, how it was built and where the old camp development site is and where there used to be gun mounts during World War II to protect the tunnel. And in fact, Johnson Tunnel was the reason they built the new railroad further over because it was only a single track. And during World War II, they were afraid that it might be blocked for one reason or another. So that's just some comments from an old part.
No, that's actually really good feedback.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. It's really good feedback because I think, when you discover that rail line and you start walking it, you have to scratch your head why it's not sort of a national trail. I mean, it is absolutely spectacular where it goes. And I think, and this is where I think the next step is really, speaking to the landowners, understanding the use, and being able, to restrict certain type of use. Because what we found is, the ranchers are very concerned about ATVs on that, on the track itself, or basically the old bed. And they've done a really good job about, piling rocks, and that's where you end up, hiking. And I think that's why so much of this has been preserved. And the tunnel is actually pristine. I was absolutely surprised. It looks like it was just done yesterday. It was absolutely beautiful. So.
Mr. Fox?
And this is exactly the kind of collaboration we were hoping for. People sharing information and, talking to people who know the area and exactly the kind of collaboration we're looking for. So I'll wrap it up with just some next steps that we're looking to explore and turning a concept into reality. So Trail Town's participation, stakeholders meetings. I'll be sending out an invitation to our all stakeholders meeting that's going to be on November 6th. Continued route development and ground truthing with Dig Studio, and then development of a second action plan with Brandon that goes through 2025. And on the marketing side, the website, more development on the website, promotional materials distribution, tabling at events, social media development, and quarterly newsletters.
I do have one more questions.
Yeah.
Who at NAU are you working with?
Frank Vernon, who's a professor in the geography department. He's also a member of the Sun Corridor board right now.
Okay.
So
I think it might also be worthwhile to at least contact some of the folks in civil engineering, because we do a lot of work with roads.
great.
Just another piece of information along that Johnson Trail, past the tunnel, heading west, you go very close to a historic dam. It's a steel dam that was built for the railroad. And it's very unusual, and it's on a historic, National Historic Site.
Yeah, I was actually able to go over by it. The other one that I couldn't find was Dante's Descent, which I think is over a little bit closer to Ash Fork. But like I said, there's a lot of really interesting history. And we actually, there was a lady walking along the rail, and we stopped, and come to find out her name's, didn't catch her last name, but Debbie, she works for the Ash Fork. Actually, she's a volunteer for the Ash Fork Museum, and told us that, she was quite excited. I didn't tell her I was there staking a trail. I was mostly interested in railroad beds, but she was quite excited and eager. We probably talked 15 minutes about the historic railroad. So I think there are people, within the communities that really would like to see, but I think there are sort of those buffers on either side, because we also looked at a lot of ranchers, that are, obviously protecting their livestock and other things like that. But what's really encouraging, though, is the majority of that line looks like it's still intact, which is really encouraging. So.
And I have a couple of questions. I'm quite as specific as Nat was talking about, but you had mentioned that there's trail examples on the East Coast and also in Europe. Can you give some specifics about what you're proposing this to look like that's already in place?
That how it would be different from those, or how it would be similar?
Or, yeah, similar, because I'm familiar with some of the, like in Spain and England, some, England, the Coast to Coast Trail, and how that's put together, and also the Camino de Santiago in Spain. So are we looking at something similar to that? And if we are, or even if it's different, do you have an example of something here in the United States, let's say on the East Coast, that maybe take a look at and
Yeah.
compare?
So one of the things that I understand is the ones that are on the East Coast, it's a little difficult to do a side-by-side comparison, just because of the amount of land in between towns and things like that. But yes, we were definitely looking to have a supported town to town experience. But we can follow up with I can email. Go ahead, Brandon.
Yeah, so I have a couple of examples. So I think the most relevant would be kind of similar to what you said. I'm trying to pull them up over here. Think of some of those old canal lines that run through like Pennsylvania, New York, and kind of that New England area. I think that's kind of the most relevant American example we'd see right now. There is an example in Missouri through their state park system that they have a riverside trail that connects several state parks and communities going across the state. And again, I'd be happy to share these examples. I think what you're talking about with these European examples in Spain and England and things like that, again, the overarching idea is that this is different from that traditional backcountry experience that we see with the kind of Triple Crown trails in the United States, the PCT and Continental Divide Trail and things like that, where those are self-supported backcountry. Here we're talking again more of that model of being town to town, being supported, and really looking at a diversity of experiences. We're not necessarily expecting that the primary user would be a statewide through hiker, but that this could be, multiple days, it could be single days, it could be going from one town to another. It could create an array of different experiences for an array of different types of users as well. Is that helpful?
Yeah, very helpful. And I have one more question. One of the slides mentioned, the deliverables, to the city. But I'm also kind of interested in what are, not just the benefits to the city, but what does the city's participation look like to this project? I don't know, cost, time, what is involved from the city perspective to make this happen?
Brandon, you want to take this one?
Sure.
We,
Yeah. So at this point, again, we're still really refining a concept. So again, we're going from this 30,000 foot level down to 10,000. We recognize there's still a lot of work to do and likely several iterations to go before we land on an on the ground alignment. So really at this point, what we're looking for from the town and what this Trail Town MOU would be an agreement to continue this planning process. So being able to use staff time and being available and willing to meet as an agency with the Sun Corridor Group and their partners, including my program in the Park Service, working with Forest Service, BLM, the county, things like that. Being able to look at kind of next steps in as we get these concepts refined. So how do we start branding and marketing this? So being able to, use a city logo, or if we're going to talk about trailhead design or kiosk design, being able to incorporate city signage or city standards onto Sun Corridor trail signs and vice versa. So again, at this point, we're not looking at we're not expecting like an annual due or some kind of way to actively be supporting the Sun Corridor Alliance. It's the focus is more on continuing the planning process for the trail on the ground.
Thank you. Commissioners, any other questions or comments right now?
Keep up good work.
No worries. Thank you again for your time. How are you principally funded? Did I miss that? What is the source of most of your funding?
So right now, the Sun Corridor Alliance itself is primarily funded through donations. The planning process for the trail has come through this Office of Tourism grant. Again, my program within the National Park Service, we offer technical assistance. So we're not a funding source, but they get a couple of years of me bugging them. So like I said, I've been working. This is my second round of working with the Alliance now. And that's part of what we're looking at now that we're refining the concept. We're developing imagery and signage and branding materials, is that we're hoping now to start engaging with more communities and more partners to be able to start advertising the trail and start developing some better, or I guess kind of the next step of those long-term funding mechanisms.
Thank you for your time. Absolutely.
Thank you.
thanks so much.
Yep. So we'll be having follow-up
you.
meetings, like Serena said. I'll also be traveling through Arizona for meetings for this trail in November. So I'll reach out to some of the folks in Flagstaff, and hopefully I can meet with some of you in person.
Actually, one more question. I'm sorry. Is it possible to get a copy of this presentation?
Absolutely.
Send it to Robert and he can
Sure.
send it out to the rest of us. Okay. Appreciate it.
Yeah, we can send you that as well as the existing
Absolutely.
action plan that they have.
Okay. Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
And I guess we move on to item B, which is some more trail planning. That you? With Mark.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Great.
Robert, you have any words for basic?
I don't think so, yeah. I'll let Mike jump right in.
Robert told me he's gonna have some words. I'm not ready. Just kidding. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate the commission's time today. Did you all have an opportunity to look at the document titled OSC colon 8.28.23? It was sent by Robert late last week. That's it. That's the one PDF. There's an updated map on page 3. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Great. Maybe we won't do any silent reading. So I want to make sure everybody's familiar with the material before we move forward. So again, Greater Observatory Basin Area trail planning effort. Our second round of public commenting is complete. We have reviewed, compiled, and bucketed all of the comments that we received. We received over 2,900 individual comments, which is pretty good, pretty informative. To back up a little bit, our first round of public comments, we received almost 600 comments. And they didn't quite get to some of the questions that we had about how to move this plan forward to meet the needs or the desires of the community. So round two, we asked them more specific questions. And from my perspective, we got a lot of information right in line with what we were trying to better understand, to make changes to the plan, to evaluate and consider other ideas that we were thinking about, but like we weren't sure where the community was on it. So this document, a little over 6 pages long, this is just for you all. And it was trying to provide a little bit of context on kind of where our discussions are at right now, as far as what the next and final draft will be prior to seeking approval from the city council. So we're very much in draft mode. None of this is settled or situated, right? So this time now, we were hoping to have a conversation about just how you feel from the commission as far as how we are either on track or off track per the City of Flagstaff Open Space Management Plan and the directives that are set forth by the city and by the community of Flagstaff itself. One of the things that we're going back and forth with is, we've heard a lot of ideas from the community. Are they aligned with the guiding open space management documents or not? And we don't want to be proposing something that is out of line with the open space division and with the open space commission. Hence my presence here today. So on this document, the first couple pages, kind of looking at, some example comments that were received during the round two public feedback. Now, each of those comments, they were intended to give you kind of a sense of the range of thoughts that were coming in from some of the questions that we asked. All of those comments were not singular. There were other, similar thoughts expressed in different ways, shapes, and forms, like through those 2,900 comments, right? And so we wanted to kind of give you that sense of like, the pros and cons list, the for and against, the questions to consider as we move forward through this planning process. So one of the things that we wanted to know was just, looking at those comments, thinking about those questions that were stated on page 2 of the document that were asked specifically to the folks that filled out the community survey, and looking at that updated map on page 3. This is a big, broad, general question, but how is the commission feeling about, what the status of this plan is in that map? Do you think that we're moving in the direction that is supportive of the open space directives, or are we moving away from what open space directives is supporting? So very generalized question. How are we doing? Seems to be on the right track. What more information do you need? What's up?
2,900 comments. Sure you saw from one extreme to the other.
Certainly, yes.
So I'll just come right out and say it. As far as I'm concerned, e-bikes don't belong in open space. They can, other places that, but in the actual legally designated open space, I don't think there's any place for it.
Yeah, okay.
And, in multiple locations, we talk about, passive, non-motorized, and all of that stuff for the open space. So I'm just totally against it within the open space, like observatory, not just observatory mesa, but Picture Canyon, all.
Certainly, the legally designated open spaces.
So
yeah,
I'm sure there's other opinions, but that's that's definitely mine. A lot of these other, creating and adaptive trails or allowing mountain bikes on certain, trails. I'm all, that's fine. I don't think mountain bikes and hikers or walkers belong on the same trail personally. But I think there's a place for them to get adaptive, have equestrian and all the other. I just don't think it's possible. And I think in going along with this, definitely the city code needs to be updated. Yeah, because there's, all of the things say non-motorized. Yet, in my opinion, I think that it's e-bikes motorized. And so while city code doesn't specifically say that e-bikes are motorized, we need to get with what's technology and what's going on. That's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you.
First of all, thanks for the work on this. Appreciate it and appreciate you presenting today. One of the open space missions is balancing recreation with other uses, right? I mean, that's definitely a thing. I know some people commented this isn't a recreation area, but in fact it is. I mean, the open space charter includes recreation very specifically. So I think it's important to go back to our source documents and our mission when we evaluate what we're doing, right? Because that's really the source of truth. So I concur with the idea of trying to increase recreational opportunities. I also second the idea that this is not a place for e-bikes. With the caveat that there's got to be some level of education and or enforcement. I ride all the time on Forest Service trails where e-bikes are banned, and I see them all the time. And it's incredibly frustrating. There's nothing worse than a standard that's not enforced or educated or whatever. At most, you might see a little no e-bike sign slapped somewhere where it's not very visible. So definitely, if we're going to go that route, I think there's got to be mechanisms to support that decision by whoever makes it. My only potential concern, I think the adaptive trail is great. I think it's what you have here is enough based on what you told us last time on the number of potential users. I'm worried we're trying to meet the recreational needs of too many user groups. And as such, you don't get any one great experience. You get a bunch of watered down experiences. And so I would consider maybe revisiting some of the way that this is diffused and focusing on maybe enhancing the user experiences for the groups that have been the most supportive and the groups that are the most maybe the user base that would use this a little bit more potentially. I don't want to exclude anybody, but I also think that we're in danger of, we have 25 feet of adaptive trail and then 6 feet of another kind of, this sort of trail, and then 12 feet of this kind. I know that's wouldn't be that way, but I'm exaggerating.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, I really like it. And I think, and just a question here, I noticed this last time, but in the southeast quadrant here, there's like a density of trails, and is a lot of that because we're taking some of those social trails and we're proposing realigning them, or is that just, I've been there and ridden a lot. It seems like there's just a higher density of use in that southeast quadrant. Is that geographically driven? Is that there's all those trails you're trying to realign, or what? Is there a particular reason that's the case?
Yeah, there's a couple of reasons. So that's Lowell properties.
Yeah.
Down there in the southeast quadrant, right? So all of the trails on there, except for a handful, there's only a few dash pink lines, do exist. They're either existing belt beds or user created trails. And so there was a review and assessment done of the existing roads and trails out there. Took a look at, the current state of sustainability and also kind of looking at what's possible from, a single experience standpoint, loop opportunities and that sort of thing. And so there are some roads and trails that are identified for obliteration, and those are primarily because they're either super redundant or unsustainable in the guise of basic maintenance work. You're doing drainage work, you're knocking the berms out. If it goes beyond that, it's truly an alignment problem. Those are also slated for obliteration as well. But that density there kind of reflects what's already there and kind of how it's already being used, and looking at preserving that a little bit for the folks that use it. We've heard from a lot of people that say they use the Lowell properties 3 times a week, 5 times a week, every day after work sort of thing, right? So we wouldn't necessarily want to remove experiences away from what folks have been used to, especially for a long time. Hence that more concentrated density.
What is obliteration? Just if I may, what does obliteration mean? What do you do?
So you would think about like restoring. We'll use like a single track trail. It's a little bit easier to describe. So you've got that 24-inch width. it has a problem for one reason or another, it's going away for whatever reason that is. And so you want to look at basically working to restore it to whatever was there originally. So obliteration means it's a physical closure, but there's also a level of restoration that's going to help the land heal to make it look like it was never there. So soil decompaction is always a part of it. Replacing organics, kind of like matching, the thickness of the duff in the surrounding forest to that area, kind of visibly making it go away. If it's on a side hill alignment, carved into the side, you'd actually want to, it's called fill slope recovery, where you want to like pull that soil back up onto the slope to make that trail bed itself go away. So you're trying to recreate the hydrology of the area before the trail was there. The trail is catching and funneling water, you need to like address that, right? And so you'd like to think over the course of a few years, like it's basically back to the same condition it would have been if nothing was ever there. Yeah, so it's like a multi-step effort, and it's, on a trail itself, it would require, like crews going out there, volunteer days, whatever that means. Definitely not just a sign saying trail.
So the attractive nuisance kind of disappears because it's not visible anymore.
That's the goal, absolutely, yep.
I'd like to start by saying that I see this as a preserve. But a preserve is no good if you don't have access to it.
Right.
But then comparing, say, Forest Service and access to it, that is heavy recreation. And I don't see this preserve as heavy recreation. But I see a balance. And where I'm coming from, and the reason I say that is I worked with Ursula Montoya in developing the proposal for the State Land Commission for that land during the 90s. In that proposal, most of those pictures are the ones I've taken, and a lot of the listening various features, both flora and fauna, with the help of some professional folks. So that's where I came from. And then I was on the tour when the State Land Commissioner and their group came up to look at the land after the proposal. And they were amazed. They were amazed with the views that were there. In driving up by accident, a deer ran across a different Phoenix.
Yeah,
Wow, look at this. And so they were, I guess my point is, they were completely enamored with the fact that it was a preserve. And this was in the late 90s and wasn't the use. And the third thing that makes me feel like protection is the most important, balanced with access, because you protect something and it's useless if you don't have access to it because nobody can. Is the fact that, because I lived at Lowell for 40 years, and as a runner, I put tens of thousands of miles on all of that area. And it was before it was a place for people to come and walk. That has developed in the last 20 years.
Yeah.
And I go back to 69. So I have to admit, I have a personal feeling about that land too. So I followed it from the beginning, proposal, and then also through the passing of the bond and all of that. So that's my perspective. When I look at the map that you've got, I think, with a few exceptions that I'm aware of, that I'm concerned with, I think you've done pretty well, very well, in fact. What I'm concerned about, there's several things I'm concerned about, but one of the things is on the western portion of it, where it goes into state land. You have some very important loop trails that go through state land. Is that all right? Has that been checked out? That's also game card, very important game card, right through there. And it's also a very wonderful feature in that when you're up just off of 515, before it gets to 506, and you walk to the south, you have this great drop and then this wonderful basin. And you have trails going all through that, but that basin is wonderful for wildlife grazing. I've seen it all along. So I'm a little bit concerned about those areas, but I understand while you have them in there, because it also, on the other hand, is a wonderful feature for hikers and bikers to go through. Not so much that it's challenging, but so much that it's beautiful.
Yeah,
So I worry about that. I wrote in general, and this matches what our commission is all about, a couple areas. The Lang Tank area.
look, can you say the tank name again?
Lang, L-A-N-G.
Where's that?
That's, well, let's see if I can find it on the map. Uh, 515, after you cross the gas line, there's a canyon that starts to your left and drops down. Just past the gas line, just outside of the forest, just north of the Forest Service, or is it west? I'm not sure. There's a drainage that goes down. That goes down to Lang Tank. Lang Tank is rarely, I've seen it filled once or twice in the 54 years. Often has water at the bottom. But what's important is on the other side of that dam is a seepage that goes for, I don't know, maybe a quarter of a mile. And the whole vegetation is different. And you have, I mentioned that before, and so you took a proposed path right down through the middle, which would have been a great bike ride because it goes right down that hill. But you moved it up on top of the hill. That's good. And then there was a trail, a road that you have obliterated that went right across it too. And that's good. But I'm still worried about that seepage, the seepage over near Marshall Tank. And of course, I'm worried about the Tunnel Springs area.
Right.
And I've written that up a number of times. And that gets to the second thing. No, I shouldn't say second. I forgot what number I'm at now. It has to do with special mountain bike routes that are very challenging. I would be willing to compromise on that. I don't think this is a place for those kinds of routes. I've run all the new ones, the Big Bang, all the new ones up there on the Mount Ellen changes, and there are thousands of them. I'm not thousands, but they're all over the place, and they range from even difficult to run on to just steep. I don't think a preserve is a place for that. However, I'm willing to compromise because, as I mentioned, there is an area on section 18 on the southwest side that is very steep. It's away from all water. It's kind of it's south facing. It's kind of a dry, not densely treed area. And very steep. It's just probably one of the steepest areas around as far as drop from top to bottom. That maybe something could be built there more in terms of a challenging mountain bike course that could have features on it. Features that would be maintainable, maybe possible wooden features and things like that. And would meet one of the reasons I'm told that the bikers, with the mountain bikers, the avid mountain bikers would like to have something like that, is it's close to town rather than going up to Mount Elvin and stuff like that. Well, I don't think that's a good reason, because it is a preserve. But I think it's a reason we might want to address. And if we addressed it that way, I would really strongly argue to take out that 3.36 route and even the 3.37 route that is just east of the Foots Trail and Tunnel Springs. And that was developed, I can't say for sure, but I'm guessing maybe 5 or 7 years ago. And it was developed just because mountain bikers said, hey, this would be great. But it wasn't done with this idea of, wait, but this is a preserve, this is near Tunnel Springs, this is near water feature, this is right, almost adjacent it is adjacent to Lowell property. And its natural route would take you into Lowell property. None of that was thought about at the time. So I don't think it meets the criteria of open space. Mainly because of the water feature. But I'd be willing to compromise on that other side. So that's that part of it. The survey. I was really interested in that, but after I looked at it, I made notes on all of it. After I looked at it, I hate to say this now, but one of the first questions should have been, identify you as a user. Are you a hiker? Are you a runner? Are you a biker, equestrian? Are you a bird watcher? Just have that as a tick mark all the way along there. Because what I'm afraid of is I'm seeing some of the statistics being skewed towards one type of user. And we can't take that out of the statistics without knowing. So suppose 10 hikers, 5 runners, 30 bikers. But we're talking about a preserve for the whole community. We're talking about a history that goes as a preserve. So that's what I'm a little bit worried about, the statistics. But given the statistics, I'll go back to the point that you've come a long ways, I think, from my point of view, of trying to meet a balance. So I think I probably said enough. I've got more to say and I've got more notes, but I think I've taken enough time. Maybe this discussion times. So I would agree with what Mr. Appleton, I can't, Bruce, no, yeah, Bruce, young Bruce. Concerns about, it's true. Concerns about how if you did not allow e-bikes, how would you enforce it? I didn't see any bikes on Buffalo Park and said, do you know you're not allowed? And got a pretty nasty comment back.
Yeah.
So that's a difficult thing. As far as whether e-bikes should be up there or not, I'm torn between the old guy who has an e-bike that helps him get a Mars Hill trail to go on to 515 and take a nice drive down 515 and then come back down again, as opposed to the e-biker that cruises up Mars Hill and gets on these trails and goes as fast as they can here or there at 20 miles per hour. Small trail, it's not a good thing, especially on a preserve. So that's a conundrum for me. I don't know how, if you didn't do it, how you prevent it. But if you did do, and this is something that I've used in talking about the Lowell trail system and arguing with some folks that said we need to remove some of these trails. One way to control use of trails is to provide the trail and then provide the rules for that trail right up front. And that provides kind of a steam release. So if you went with an e-bike trail that was defined as such and had access in a way that was such that kind of protected other uses of that trail, and then said this route is an e-bike trail only. And then you have a little bit of leverage of saying you're not preventing them all, but you're just providing one particular route. That's just a thought.
And kind of along those same lines, the fact that trying to control it, I think that e-bike is there's such ambiguity of whether there's it's allowed or not allowed. Say, all the open space is strictly for non-motorized usage. Yet there's no real definition saying that, yes, e-bikes are motorized. I think that is also a problem trying to enforce, in any place.
Yeah, I mean, e-bikes are classified as motorized on Forest Service. State of Arizona does not classify e-bikes as motorized vehicles, so yeah. It gets fuzzy really, really fast for sure.
But the city, if they so desire, can say that they're not allowed, correct? They can
Yeah,
restrict
to
the,
my understanding, I mean, yeah, the council had that discussion on e-bikes on foot trails a couple of years ago. I was actually looking into, e-bikes on recreation trails and other places, and the best comparison, and one of the only comparisons I found, was Boulder, city of Boulder in Colorado. And they had to pass an ordinance to allow e-bikes on recreational trails, but still allowed the management agency to decide which trails they were allowed and which trails they weren't. So some of their open space parks in the mountains, it's open space and mountain parks division of the city. The ones that go up into the mountains, Flatiron and stuff, they're still not allowed. Some of their open spaces that are out more in the prairie areas, they are allowed, but it did require an ordinance to be able to set that direction for the management. Yeah.
I remember that conversation. E-bikes on foot trails, but I don't remember any discussion about open space.
No, I don't believe there was any. I might be wrong on that, but yeah, I don't remember that either. Yeah.
Discussion
Right.
around that.
Yep.
Can you hear me? It's Jackie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hey guys, I really like everything you all said, and I respect that it's a preserve. I like what Nat had to say. I did see 2 e-bikers on Schultz Trail yesterday where they're not allowed, and I said, hey, those aren't allowed on this trail, and I got a very mean response back. So I don't think it's our responsibility to take on this e-bike issue, but I do also ride an e-bike in town. I commute to work that way. So I have, I understand. And I just, is there a place for us to pass this issue off to Martin Ince or something, where if the e-bike community can understand that if they bike where they are allowed to bike, then we can designate trails, but until people can follow the rules, then maybe trails aren't going to be designated. I mean, I don't know, but we are going to be going around and around this e-bike discussion if we are designating trails. And I think it's beyond the Open Space Commission's responsibility. This is not going to go away, is my only concern. I've only been to 3 meetings so far, and we've talked about it at all 3 meetings. So, yeah. But I really do like the trail plan. I need to get out there and ride it or hike it, because it seems like on a small map, it just seems like a lot of trails and high density. And I don't think it is on on the landscape scale. But it's also hard to figure it out when we don't actually have the trails on the ground. And all I can reference is these new trails going in up out of the Y and stuff on the Forest Service. You think there's a bunch of redundancy, but actually there's a lot of different opportunities now that have become available. So I think what we have to just make sure is this plan doesn't have redundancy, does offer lots of opportunities for wildlife watching and birding and mountain biking and hiking. But somehow make sure that everyone's got their space. But I really like what's come up, and I really like what everyone's had to say. That's all.
So the comment that this is a preserve, so I've always had this question. This is actually not a preserve. It's a natural area by designation. Picture Canyon is a preserve by designation, but there doesn't appear to be, like in the Park Service, the name of the place suggests what it's managed for: preserves, parks, recreation areas. I can't find any literature that says why a place is called a certain thing, like a natural area is more indexed towards XYZ management, because if you read through the management plan, they're all super similar. I just mentioned that because that could be confusing to folks who are used to other, ways things are branded, et cetera. Plus, that's also guiding our discussion when in fact that's not really an accurate like thing to use. And so I just bring that up for observation. And then secondly, I do think we have a stake in the e-bike thing. If it's not the Open Space Commission, who? I mean, obviously, we're just an advisory kind of board, but I think we can have an opinion about it. This is a pretty big deal, what we're considering here. And I think offering some kind of idea around how it should be managed is within our scope and our charter. That's it. That's how we can make recommendations. Right.
So let me ask, it's called a natural area,
Observatory basin, natural area.
but what does it say in the original document about the land?
So Bruce is right that our name doesn't designate like a particular use. So like recreation area for the Park Service, or National Park for the Park Service. Preserve and natural area are just like the names we come up with. And so it doesn't change really the management of those properties. Now that said, we are trying to maintain our property for preservation and recreation. So we want to preserve a natural type of experience and the ability for wildlife and whatnot. And we also want to, our mission is to provide recreation. Passive recreational actions, I should say.
So I'm totally wrong, but I know in talking early on, it's always called preserve, but I thought the agreement.
Our
with the
conservation
state-
easement?
Yeah.
Our conservation easement has direction, I believe, to preserve the area. It does use that language.
That's.
And it does have language in there about providing recreation as well.
Yeah.
And the conservation easement limits the amount of development, that physically limits the amount of development we can do to 20 acres.
Yeah.
Which this plan is under 20 acres. By foot. I mean, we're not really looking to maximize that 20 acres.
Yeah.
Work with it.
Okay, well, good. I don't mind calling it natural area.
I mean,
Yeah, I'm just bringing that up as a point of like, it doesn't, it's a little bit of, it doesn't really tell you what it's for.
But I guess my impression is that it's got a different mission than the Forest Service mission. Totally different. It's owned by the city, purchased by the community. All of the arguments for purchasing it all had to do with preservation, natural area, open space. And again, I see recreation, part of it is really access to this preserve rather than it's recreation. So that's my comment. If we've got a little more time, I had some comments on the survey and the wonderful job you guys did. And do I have a little time on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think we have another item after this regional time. I think we have time.
I was interested in the question that you had to rate these. This was number 3. And for example, parking, it asked parking access. And it said 50% said, yeah, there's great parking access. Does that mean they're just thinking about Lowell Observatory? Because we've been struggling with parking access the whole time, and I'm not sure we really resolved it, other than the fact that we've got one way out on 66. And possibly on the west end there for equestrians. Are they talking about Thorpe Park and the access up there? It just seems like. And they also said access points. Said 64%, yeah, lots of access points. Well, again, if you connect it with parking and access points, it seems like we've got a challenge there that we haven't really resolved yet. And yet the survey says it's great. So I was just wondering about those some of the survey results. And it may have had to do again with maybe the number of people in certain interest areas and their votes. I don't know. And you can't do anything about it now. I'm just saying, try to weigh it as best as we can.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the previous to that on the website, there was a map that people were asked to review.
Yeah.
For the parking proposed and existing and access proposed and existing.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lowell was not on that map.
No, it was not on that.
No,
Yeah.
Lowell was not on that map. So when you're looking at what's on the map, that's what you're asking people to respond to.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't tell you what they were thinking.
Yeah.
When they clicked 1, 2, or 3, but just because something says 64% yes, doesn't mean that we go with it.
Yeah.
Right? It's not
That's
a,
it.
we don't look at this as like, just because we have the percentages, it's gonna justify a decision.
No, I guess what I was asked, whether they understood what that access was. And I have no problem with Lowell. I don't think Lowell has any problem eventually when we get trail systems in there, having access there, because there's gonna be plenty of parking. When everything is done. But I was just wondering, from our discussions about access and difficulty with
Yeah.
working it out, why they thought it's good access.
Yeah. Yeah, it was reduced amount of proposed access from the original map.
Yeah.
Right? So there's less access. So if you're thinking about, you know, the timeline of this planning process, you see fewer access points.
Yeah.
And is that still, you know, is that acceptable? Is that not acceptable?
Yeah. But I just can't believe the work you guys have been putting into this, and it's hard. It's hard.
It's more questions.
And then the closer you get to it, once you make a decision, that's where you really get the input.
I mean, yeah. And I mean, Nat, you mentioned balance, right? That balance
Yeah.
between,
Yeah.
you know, that like access and providing recreation, but balancing with that mentality of preserve. I mean, that's what we're looking for.
Sure.
We're striving for balance,
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah. This likely means that nobody gets everything that they're looking for. Right? So.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, I think I actually read the management plan and like thoroughly for anticipation of this, just because it needs to be a document. I think I don't want my personal opinion to like weigh in on this. Like, does this meet the criteria that has been set out?
Yeah.
And I think if you look at like 2.32 and what it says the recreational opportunities will be, I think this plan is 100% consistent with the management plan as adopted in whatever it was, 2020. I think from my perspective, that's super important, and I think it's consistent with that.
Any other comments before we move on? And thank Mark for his work.
Yeah, thank you.
Robert?
I have some follow-up questions, thoughts. So we're gonna invite Mark hopefully back next month to continue to hash out this topic. And at some point, the commission, we'd like the commission to like formally weigh in on the draft before we come back to our management partnership. So I just wanted to kind of mention a few things that I've been thinking about as I listen to you guys chat. So on the topic of e-bikes, federal land or Forest Service lands consider e-bikes as motorized vehicles, right? Our management plan says no motorized vehicles, but it doesn't speak directly to e-bikes. And then state e-bikes class 1 are permitted by legislation unless the municipality takes action to prohibit their use. So class 1 and 2 are currently allowed, like on the Foots Trail system. Due to the decision that city council made that Mark referenced. And then class 3 are prohibited by a municipality unless prohibited unless the municipality takes action to allow their use. So that kind of gives you an idea of what can and can't be done.
Everybody good with class 1, 2, and 3 designations for e-bikes?
I know one. How about King Street?
Yeah, class 1's pedal assist only, so you have to pedal to engage the motor to help you up the hill.
Yeah.
Maxes out at 20 miles an hour. Class 2 also maxes out at 20 miles an hour, may or may not have a throttle. So there's a throttle that can engage the battery to help you get going without having to pedal. Class 3, pedal assist and throttle up to 28 miles an hour. So the big distinction is in the miles and if there's a throttle or no throttle in the classes of units.
So one doesn't have a throttle, 2 does have a throttle?
It says that they don't have to, but they may. From my research, they do. If it's class 2, they have it.
And what is called the ones that are? Well, we were out there and that electric bike went zinging down through there. What is
It's
that?
an electric motorcycle.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, e-bikes have that, they have that pedal assist. That you're
Okay.
definitely looking at pedals that, yeah, so it'd be, there's no pedals if they're just platforms, that'd be a motorcycle.
electric motorcycle.
And that is an issue. It's probably separate from this, but I've heard at one of our last regional trail meetings that we're getting motorcycles on a signature trail, like there's no one.
Wow.
So just a couple of thoughts, like something for us, for the commission to consider is our e-bikes a form of passive recreation. So our open space management plan does speak to passive recreation.
Yeah.
So that is, something that we need, the commission needs to consider when they're waiting on that particular topic. So this plan,
Excuse me, Robert,
Yeah.
how, and this is following Bruce's type of logic, how would you decide that? What criteria do you use?
So passive recreation is recreation that utilizes non-consumptive use. And so your typical definition of passive recreation is hiking, kayaking, horseback riding. Cycling is a form of passive recreation. So basically, if you look at that list, it's things without motors. I actually went down a 4-hour rabbit hole in law cases, trying to understand if there's been any sort of court decisions about that, anything battery related, battery transportation. And the idea is that a consumptive use or is that a passive use or not?
Yeah.
I found this much. I didn't find anything that cleared up anything on any level of government that said e-bikes are passive or consumptive uses. And I'm not a lawyer, so I might have been looking in the wrong places, but it was a rabbit hole that I went down and it cleared up nothing. So that's a big question.
So Robert, you're asking unanswerable
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah.
it's more just posing ideas.
Right. And that, yeah. And how that relates to the idea of the management directions that you have. And if something is going to get supported by the commission, we'll use e-bikes as an example because we're talking about e-bikes right now. Let's pretend the Open Space Commission says, yeah, we think it's appropriate for class 1 e-bikes on the trails. Is that going to require any sort of change of language or a request to the city for an ordinance or something like that to allow it, right? And I think those are the implications, not necessarily like where we're at with court decisions on the matter. Because as far as I can tell, nobody is saying definitively that e-bikes are consumptive uses. Nobody's saying they're passive uses.
Nobody wants to be first.
Head in the sand, for sure. Yep. And e-bikes are on this plan because our heads were pulled out of the sand by force per comments from the community.
And just to remind you, this is a cross jurisdictional plan, so it covers forest service as well. So that makes it a bit complicated. Now, there are maybe a possibility of getting a special permit for allowing e-bikes on federal lands that the trails are maintained by the city. So that is why this question is still somewhat on the table. I do think that this discussion on e-bikes is different than the discussion council had earlier, because when they were really talking about this is more for commuter type trips, transportation. Whereas we're talking more just passive recreational uses. The one spot where it gets a little tricky is when FTI weighed in on this and had community feedback. They really advocated for a designated e-bike route. I don't want to call it a commuter route, but it would be a route from, Fort Valley coming through Observer Green Mesa that will allow a somewhat similar commuter type route into town. And so, you know, is that appropriate? Is it appropriate to have a route for that purpose? So that is something else that we need to direction on.
It also would be very limited seasonally.
And that's why it can't be called a commuter route, because we would not maintain snow, we would not maintain the trail, so it'd be open for use. At weather compliant. In terms of this e-bike discussion.
Sure, it's right, let's bring up, but I gotta do it now, I'll probably forget. In terms of education and enforcement. I think it's important to think of either yes or no, and not having distinctions of a class 1, we can have 1s, but not 2s and 3s, or we can do 1s and 2s, but not 3s, because that's just gonna cause a great deal of confusion for folks who are riding the bikes and who aren't riding the bikes. If we say, okay, well, 1s, and then people are hiking up there and they see an e-bike come by, most folks aren't gonna know a 1 from a 2 from a 3. And so all it is gonna do is cause, I think, confusion and frustration. So I think we do this, I really do, as much as I hate, oftentimes hate categories, I think we need to say yes or no, and whether they're motorized or not, or if it, however they're defined. Because if not, I think it will be just a mess.
Yeah, the Forest Service has also started now putting no e-bikes, no pedal assist. So 2 stickers for this exact reason. I've seen a guy argue he's not on an e-bike because he's pedaling it. No, this is pedal assist. This is not an e-bike. So I think that's an excellent point. Yeah.
Not gonna make a lot of folks happy.
Yeah.
No matter which way.
Right, yeah.
And I just looked it up in Boulder County Open Space. Recommended passing an ordinance that e-bikes be considered passive recreation. And there's lots of articles about it, so very controversial.
Another rabbit hole.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, where it gets tricky is the request for like ADA type access. Now, adaptive bikes are actually already an exception. So adaptive bikes can be on single track trails even for Forest Service property currently. But where it gets a little tricky is folks that don't have a need for an adaptive bike, but they want to get access to the Mesa or another location, and their current condition doesn't allow them to do that. But an e-bike is different. So something else.
What's the definition of an adaptive mountain bike?
I think I asked this question during the public meeting that we had here, and all adaptive cycles are e-bikes. Was the answer.
So
They all have an electric.
They're mobility devices. They're classified the same way. It's either the American Disability Act or the Architectural Barriers Act, that they classify in the same way as they would like electrical wheelchairs. And so these are typically 3-wheeled devices where you're either kneeling on them or you're sitting in a seat. And you don't pedal with your legs, you would pedal with your hands, so they're hand cycles. And they do have the E battery to them. They're about 36 inches wide. This is a very good definition, Nat. I'm just rattling off what I know in my head. They're about 36 inches wide. And so because they're a mobility device, they are allowed where other, motorized or E-type devices are not allowed. Specifically non-motorsport service trails to Robert's point. If they can physically go on the trails, they are allowed. But you need a 3-foot wide plus trail to like make that a physical possibility. Yeah, so when we're looking at, you know, adaptive bike trails, we're looking at expanding the width of the trails to accommodate these cycles. They'd still be natural surface, they'd still have all the sustainability elements that we would do on like a narrow or single track, it would just be expanded. So they have, you know, the ability to ride there if they want to.
I just have a couple other thoughts I want to share. One, you were talking a bit about the survey and if one user group, let's say more comments than another user group. So we're not weighting our response based on like the number of comments. So there's a number of different criteria we're looking at to making decisions. So it's not just like we got 100 comments on this topic saying that we want it, and only 2 saying no. Right? We're not going to make decisions just based on the number. And then the bicycle community has weighed in on the survey, and I think that is noticeable in the survey. And I just wanted to point out that the trails that are you could consider more for a bicycle experience are somewhat minimal, I think, compared to the entire plan. If you look up here, those highlighted areas are the routes that would be more, what would you say, like more leaning towards a bicycle experience, a downhill bicycle experience as opposed to, I don't want to use the word downhill. It's not, they're not downhill trails, but that would more offer a kind of like, you know, type of experience for bicycles. So out of the entire plan, I think it's not a ton of trail language. So I wanted to clarify that, and then
But it's not the length, it's the location.
yeah, right. And then one of the things that we've done is revise this now. So the light purple is what was in the first proposal. There, and then the darker kind of maroon color that stands out, that is the revision. So what can you summarize like what the revision consists of, like how many miles?
Yeah, so and this is just for the dash lines. These are the proposed concept trails. The purple lines from the last round total 24 miles throughout the whole Great Observatory Mesa area. Now with these new lines, there's 18.3. So about 25% reduction in trails, and really thinking about, you know, thinking about the themes of the comments. So like the themes that we were hearing, you know, were related to wildlife habitat. They were related to redundancy. They were related to loop length and intentional experiences for folks. And I'm not saying that we're there yet or that we think that we've completely accomplished any of this. And so we tried to reduce trails where it made the most sense for wildlife considerations on a larger scale. We also tried to reduce some of the like redundancies and like connection points, and trails doing more or less the same thing, kind of in the same area. We kind of started like just taking that stuff off the map. We did add 2 of those blue lines to Robert's point about intentional bike trails. There's the one going up the Thorpe Trail, and there's kind of the one at the base of the Town Springs Trail. On the map, they're identified as 5.26 and 5.25. These are conceptual, so this kind of means nothing, but on this map, they will total a half. So that'd be 1 mile total for those blue lines that are the trail 3.36, that does exist.
And then I guess the question is, we talked a bit about balance of preservation of recreation is, is this map show that current balance that the commission is advocating for? Or if it not, like what is the change that we need to make to achieve that balance? I think is what the question is that we need the commission's help on.
That is something Mark's coming back next month, then we will hash this out.
So, good, Jackie.
Yes.
Jackie, another question, or is this your hand from before?
No, I think my hand's just permanently raised.
And then we talked a little bit about access versus trails too. So this plan does provide additional access points, although somewhat limited. And that main limit is because border properties just don't allow it because they're private property. So we really don't have any additional access like on section 6, except for the 5.12, which is a longer ride. Section 8 there, that was also challenging because it's surrounded by private property. Nobody wants internal access. So if those opportunities arise, that's something that we will definitely be interested in providing access, but at this moment, there's no opportunities for it. But that's that much.
A lot to chew on for the next meeting as well. I'm prepared next time as well. Anything else you wanted to, before we move on?
My main question would be, thinking about for next time, all we wanted to do today was to have a discussion to see, where people are at on this, but what types of information or questions would you like answered or provided prior to the next meeting? Because we can pull all that stuff together to give as much context as we can to continue having discussions. Do you have any ideas right now, Bruce?
Yeah, if you could determine current use on like a per trail mile basis, and then extrapolate that based on the increase, the nominal increase in potential trail miles. I don't want to, that's not doable, it's not doable. It's like, I'm trying to have an apples to apples comparison.
Sure.
Because we're trying to find that right balance, and we're trying to meet the management plan of a wide array of recreational opportunities. What does that look like? Like what is the impact on the area look like? What would we project? I know it's hard to see the future, you don't have a crystal ball. Just the fact that you added a trail might, just attract who knows how many people just because they hear a new trail. I see a new trail built on social, and I get in my car and go ride it. So if there's any way to try to like scientifically estimate what we think the new load factor will be based on that kind of per trail mile user measurement. So I feel like I just talked in a foreign language there.
No, you're good. It'll likely not be as scientific as you're hoping for, but we can, because you all have some sort of count use there.
You have a trail counter.
So we can have, that would be our starting point. And something that we want to consider, and we can put that in a document is, what are the nodes and connections and like how that could potentially disperse use and like what would be the overall, overall volume potentially at any given like day, week, or season on this area. Maybe how the plan addresses that or doesn't, and like what that limitation is.
Yep, temporary closures or shared use, we've talked about directional stuff every other day, all the things that you can use as management to try to take this user load and potentially reduce the impact, or at least mitigate it, that comes with the increase in opportunity.
Yep. Great, thank you.
Sound like a professional.
That don't assume that I'm professional, that would be me or something more.
This, intro that, related to your question, but you talked about the quote unquote commuter bypass route. Where is that? What are folks talking about?
So Forest Service Road 506 comes in from Fort Valley. You would be following this route here. And then coming through section 6, Forest Service Road 515, is that right? No, I'm sorry. It's further down. It's the red and white dash line right. Be passing, coming down on 515, the red and white dash line there from section 7. And then that links up with Mars Hill. Comes down.
Would that be natural surface too, or?
In the plan, these are existing Forest Service roads. So in the plan, what we're proposing is to maintain these roads to improve their condition and not much beyond that. Signing, right? Like identifying like where, how to connect up into Vaderville, down into town. So not proposing much in the way of improvements. We did receive some comments about that. You know, could we turn it into a foots trail? Could we surface the trail? You know, could we do more along those lines? But it's pretty cost prohibitive. Which is why we're proposing so little. Routine, basic maintenance and signage.
This is the end of the South Snowball Road, the trail that goes up there, follows the reclaimed water line that goes in the Snowball. It comes right up just to the east of A19. Does that go through private land or
Do not know.
the gas line? I mean, I used to run that all the time, except for one steep cliff, which you can get around. It's almost direct from Snowball Road. Due south almost.
Right. Yeah, let us look into that. We're gonna write that down.
Probably move on.
What,
Ollie,
one quick thing, could you get clear more information about how hunters on the Forest Service land or wherever can get vehicle access to it? That was quite a uproar last year when people were up there and all of a sudden there was these cars in places that weren't allowed. So I just throw that out and get more.
Currently, Forest Service has an easement that travels through section 12, there to section 7, since they own section 7. So we do allow motorized traffic currently through on 515A into section 7 on 515A. It's only on, it's supposed to be only on that road. Of course, there's lots of unauthorized roads that vehicles are using. For the rest of our property, it is part of being 11 and or something like that. And we do actually allow some types of hunting, on the city property. That answer your question?
Yeah, archery isn't allowed on the city limits.
It is. That's overseen by Arizona Game and Fish. The city doesn't weigh in on that. They don't necessarily are able to make a decision. The commission of Arizona Game and Fish Department makes that decision.
Oh, wow.
They do make exceptions for municipal parks. There's a small section in McMillan Mesa that is technically a quarter-mile away from houses and things like that, even as a municipal park. So there's no hunting allowed.
I remember when that controversy happened. I don't, it's just a problem, I think, especially in the winter time, when the roads are bad. And you go in there. You guys grade it all nice and get it all ready for use and stuff.
Another solution, another project.
Yeah.
So hopefully, we'll just get to the restaurant.
Good.
But you're not allowed to hunt within a quarter mile of a dirt tank. And there are a couple of tanks out there. Just saying.
Nice check.
all right, we should probably wrap this up and.
Yeah, let's see if George has
I see Sarah has been very patient. And for the next,
I think Jordan is gonna be there.
regional plan update.
Jordan, do you have enough time, or do we need to move you to another?
Yeah, no, I think I can breeze through this pretty quickly. So I'll try to keep it short, but glad to be here. So I am not Sarah. Sarah is, I think, still on the phone. I think she might need to head off to educate some young trail users here in a couple minutes. So I will go ahead and share my screen and just making sure you can all see that.
Yeah.
Great. So yeah, my name is Jordan Hollinger. I'm an associate planner with the city's comprehensive planning program, and I'm part of the core team that's working on the Flagstaff Regional Plan update. So we are just here. We're going around to all the boards and commissions this summer, just providing an update in terms of where we're at with the project. You might remember that we came to you and went to the other boards and commissions as well and did a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats assessment last summer, I think. So we've done a lot since then. So we're just back to kind of give you an update about what we've been up to. So quick reminder, the Flagstaff Regional Plan is kind of our highest level planning and policy document in the city. It's kind of what we base a lot of our codes on, or that's the idea, that it kind of sits and filters down through our more specific plans and other implementation tools like the zoning code, engineering standards, that kind of thing. It's a regional plan because we co-create it with Coconino County. So for us in the city, it's the city's general plan, which if you are a resident of Flagstaff, you actually get to vote on it. And then it's an amendment to the Coconino County Comprehensive Plan as well. So you may have seen this graphic before. This is just kind of our update plan. We're currently in phase 2 of that plan, and we've been doing some pretty exciting things in that space. I know some of the commission members have been to some of the activities and workshops that we've organized in phase 2. So here to talk to you a little bit about that tonight. So last fall is when we started phase 2 of the plan update process. We started with a series of visioning workshops. Maybe some of you attended some of those. We held 11 total workshops, and we spread them throughout the regional planning area. And we had kind of this focal question for the workshops that was, think about where and how you live, work, and play in the Flagstaff region. How can we build a community together that allows all community members of the region to thrive through 2045 and beyond? So during the workshops, we had 4 stations that included asking people to write vision statements. We asked people to think about key questions or trade-offs that we should consider as we go through the plan update. We did community asset mapping, and then we had a facilitated conversation circles as part of that. So in total, we had over 150 workshop participants, and then simultaneous to the workshops, we also had a visioning survey that we put out to the public using the Flagstaff Community Forum, and that posed a lot of similar questions to the public about kind of what their vision for the future was. And we had 126 responses to that survey. We also were going out to a lot of events during that time and kind of talking to people at places like the concerts in the park and the county fair and that kind of thing. So from the workshops, from the visioning workshops, we heard a lot about community values and kind of what people wanted to see for the future of Flagstaff. And probably one of the most frequently cited elements, maybe not a surprise to this commission, is that people really value our natural environment, our open spaces, our parks, and they really want to see those things prioritized and preserved so that people have access to them well into the future. We also heard about a desire to see more transportation options outside of single occupancy vehicles, kind of that multimodal focus. We heard a real desire and need for better and more affordable housing options. We heard from people that they wanted to see Flagstaff tackle equity and become a more equitable place for residents. Retaining our unique community character was a big thing that came out as well. And then we also heard a lot about wanting to see see that City Council and the Board of Supervisors be more responsive to community needs and more accountability in that decision making. So moving from the conversation kind of around values and that high level community vision, we're now in a process that we call scenario planning. And scenario planning is really all about testing ideas and trying to understand how different policy directions may play out in the future, given kind of different conditions in the future. So to do this, we're using a software called Urban Footprint. We call this a sketch modeling software. And this type of program really allows us to test different ways of allocating growth and development throughout our regional planning area. So, ultimately we can say things like, if we are going to grow as a community and we grow in this particular way, or we have this land use pattern, what does that mean for things like driving behavior, water consumption, housing prices? So we can model a lot of those different things that our community cares about through this type of software. So at the beginning of the scenario planning process, which we started towards the end of last year, the beginning of this year, we formed what we called a technical advisory group. And that's a group that's really helping to advise us as staff and our consultant team in the assumptions and data we're kind of bringing into this scenario planning process. So over the last few months, we've worked with our technical advisory group and our consultant team to use materials from our visioning workshops, as well as another set of workshops that I'll talk about in another few slides, to develop what we call scenario themes. And that really involves taking a broad set of ideas that came from community members and distilling them down into narratives in terms of growth and development that we can model using that urban footprint software. So once we've finished modeling our scenarios over the next few weeks, we'll be bringing those results and the scenario themes, kind of those narrative forms, and bringing those back to the public so that they can see what each one means for our community. So an important element to the scenario planning process is that in addition to kind of creating what I would maybe refer to as policy directive themes that look at, what if we change land use patterns in this way, or, what if we do X, what if we do Y? We're actually testing them against a scenario of what if we kind of continue on the path that we've been on. So we call that our business as usual scenario. And I think that's one of the most powerful elements of scenario planning, is that we really get to test different policy directions against one another, but we also get to test them against what we're currently doing as a community. So again, later this fall, we'll be bringing those scenarios back to the public so that they can kind of look at what each one means in terms of all the things that we care about, like carbon neutrality, affordable housing, water use, and that kind of thing. So you'll see here on the right, these are our tag members. And this is a group that has expertise in a variety of fields, from things like transportation, natural resources, public engagement, economics, design. So we cover a lot of different areas in this group, and all of these people volunteered to help us. And it's important to note that this group has not been helping us to decide policy or policy direction. They're really just there to help us decide how we test what we hear from the community in our scenario modeling and how we can be robust as possible in that process. So this group has been meeting about once a month since the start of the year, and we record their meetings, post them to our project website. You can go and watch them and see what the group has been up to kind of behind the scenes, if you'd like to do that. So while the technical advisory group has been working on the back end, we've been really heavily engaged with the community kind of around this idea of growth and uncertainty. So earlier this spring, we hosted 13 workshops that we called Face the Future Flagstaff, 5 of which we held in very non-traditional workshop settings. And I know I saw Nat out at one of our workshops, so thanks for coming out to that, Nat. Just to talk a little bit about the workshop itself, this wasn't kind of maybe a more typical workshop where you go around to different stations. We actually gamified what we call gamifying our planning and scenario work. So we actually invited the public to kind of sit with us in the space of thinking about, given future conditions, how we should strategize around this idea of growth, development, and land use. So the way this worked is that participants were broken up into groups of 5 or 6. They received a game board that you can see here on the screen. It was a gridded map of the regional planning area. And then each group was assigned 3 what we called challenge cards that had random conditions pertaining to jobs and population growth, climate change impacts, and infrastructure funding. So the goal of kind of the game was to allocate different types of growth. So think residential, commercial, industrial, civic space, open space. So allocating those types of growth throughout the region under the conditions that were created for the game. So what we hoped this process would do is kind of force people to work together, and instead of just kind of telling us where they did and didn't want growth, to think more strategically given their particular scenario in terms of allocating growth. So for example, in a group where maybe they had high population and jobs growth, but low future infrastructure funding, what does that mean about future growth? Should we be prioritizing growth along existing infrastructure instead of maybe thinking about areas where you would need to build substantial new infrastructure to support that growth? So I think one of the things that we thought was powerful about doing scenario planning in this way is that it hopefully shakes up a lot of the assumptions and maybe the predetermined ideas that we have about what the future holds, and brings the community together to try to solve these challenges together. So out of this process, we created a set of data that included 60 maps and detailed notes about how each group played the game. So we played this game with 60 groups. And we were really fortunate. We had two really great interns that spent like 2 weeks digitizing all of this analog information into a usable format for both our consultant team as well as our TAG, our technical advisory group. The major themes that we saw coming out of the Face the Future workshops, and this is not all inclusive, these were just kind of some of the main ones, is that we really saw some support for this idea of complete neighborhoods and mixed use development, kind of this idea of land use patterns that support multimodal access to services and amenities. We definitely heard concerns about growth and what that means in terms of community character. And if, you know, for a lot of people, if we're going to grow, how do we manage density in a way that is compatible with our community? We heard a lot of support for transit. We did hear a desire to see better road conditions. Certainly, again, more multimodal connectivity. And then we heard from groups that they really want to see congestion tackled. Like we heard from the visioning workshops, again, protecting our open spaces, national forests, parks, and other natural amenities was a really big theme through this process as well. So from the visioning and Face the Future workshops, as well as an online survey that we had kind of running in tandem with the workshops, our technical advisory group and our consultants have started to look at how we can package these growth ideas into scenario themes that we then build in that modeling software. So that is, we're kind of wrapping up that process of kind of modeling those. We have a technical advisory group meeting coming up in September that will go over some preliminary modeling results. So keep an eye out for information about that. I already mentioned this, but a big part of this is also this business as usual model. So that'll be a really interesting piece of this effort, especially when we start comparing it to some of our kind of more policy directive scenarios. So to round out phase 2 and move into phase 3 of the plan, we have some important events that we wanted to make you aware of. So we had a TAG meeting on August 2nd that went over draft scenario themes. So if you're intrigued to kind of see where the community's input is going as far as kind of different alternative scenarios, check out that meeting. They go over some draft versions in that meeting. So really interesting one to take a look at. Our next TAG meeting, again, will be the first chance that people get to look at the draft modeling results. So that will be an extremely interesting TAG meeting. They're not live, but you can watch them. We try to post the recordings the day after the meeting. So and we'll send out a blast about that. So if you're on our newsletter, keep an eye out for that. And then if you get nothing else from this presentation, I know I'm moving fast, but one of the most important pieces of the regional plan update process will be happening this fall, probably in the beginning to middle of November, and that's going to be our scenario choosing process. So this is where we present our modeling results to the public, and you get to weigh in on which one you think we should adopt in the next regional plan, and what we start building kind of our land use policies, goals and policies around. So that's a really important step. We will be sending out postcards in the mail about that process. So please keep an eye out for that, and please attend one of those workshops if you can. So after we've done the scenario choosing, we're going to be moving into phase 3, which is actually putting pen to paper and writing the plan. So that's kicked off really by that scenario choosing process. In terms of writing the plan, we are currently convening a city and county manager appointed committee to oversee the writing of the plan. And the way this has kind of worked is that we've already received 34 community member nominations from City Council and the Board of Supervisors. We put together a staff report that looked at kind of the interest areas or the expertise of those 34 people, and as well as the neighborhood that they are a part of. We sent that report to the city and county manager's office, and we are now awaiting them to invite 20 members to that committee, or roughly 20 members. Our hope is that the first committee meeting will take place in the next month or so. And then throughout the writing phase of the regional plan, the group will hopefully meet 1 to 2 times per month. And this is not a formal city commission like yourself, so they don't have to abide by kind of the standard city commission rules. They'll get to set their own rules on things like quorum and operating procedures. And I think that's a really important thing for us, because it means that the committee will get to kind of do things like ask us to do additional public engagement that maybe they're involved with, and things like that if they so choose. So from there, we're going to create the plan kind of through the framework that you see here. So we'll work towards establishing a writing schedule this fall and our writing objectives. We'll review the chosen scenario from that scenario choosing workshop, and then start crafting the land use chapter, which is kind of the core of the regional plan, and then start working out from there in terms of the other chapters and accompanying goals and policies. So although the plan is centered around land use, we do have other elements that are required under state law. Things like transportation are required in the regional plan. But then we have some freedom to add chapters and content that is specific to Flagstaff as well in that process. And then it's really about iteration until the committee is ready to endorse a draft for legal review, and then the mandatory public review as well. So that's all I have. I know that was pretty quick. I am happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see if people have hands raised or any questions. So and if you want to move on to the next item for sake of time, you are also welcome to email myself or Sarah Dector with any questions that you might have.
Question?
Good, clear job.
Thank you.
Jordan, I had one quick question. Will you be coming back to the commissions when you try to firm up the scenario choice? Or is that something they do it as individual members of the public?
We certainly can. I mean, our intention is that every commission member should hear about this kind of outside the commission setting. Like this is our intention for the scenario choosing, is that we get like 3-4 times the public engagement that we've had so far, just because it's such a critical phase. If the commission would like to have a reminder, I can make a note of that, and we can just come back during like the even just like the public participation phase and just give a reminder that that's going on. Maybe you meet fairly late in the month, so it might be maybe we come back in the October meeting just to give a reminder that that's going on, if you'd like that.
Thanks, Jordan. Yeah, I think even email reminder would be fine.
Sure.
Thank you. Commissioner Thomas, are you still online?
Yep, I'm here. That was great, Jordan. I've been wondering how that was going.
Good.
All right. And I guess we still have quorum as well. So if we would like to continue to the last item or so beyond our 6 o'clock.
I think because we advertised 6 o'clock to the public, we need to skip the rest, but I was wondering if we need to quickly do the heritage grant support letter. And give approval to that. Okay. Then I think we can carry everything else forward.
So we skip over the update and go to the heritage grant letter.
Yeah, that's okay. So I'll just real quickly summarize. Sarah Holdich's position where she does education outreach is funded with the heritage grant. There's an opportunity to apply for funding for additional 2 years. We are working on the application. We'd love a support letter from the commission. Do you want to
We should make
it?
Show it real quick and then we'll make a decision.
Can I just ask a question? Does anybody else know who might, like, are there other entities that might be applying for this grant in environmental education that we'd be competing against? I'm just wondering, does anybody know? Like, is Willow Bend applying for this or something like that?
I haven't heard that they're.
Yeah, we don't know who's applying for it exactly, but when we talked with the Arizona State Parks folks, they said it's not very competitive. There's not a lot of people that apply for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And they did get more money this year too, with money from the state legislature.
Yeah.
And they did get more money this year too.
Didn't we get a letter of support from Willow Bend?
We did get a letter of support from Willow Bend, yes.
Oh, perfect. Okay.
I haven't read the letter, I make a motion that we sign the letter.
All right, do I have a second? Commissioner Ackland. And all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Decision made. All right. I guess the rest of this can be put off till the next meeting and.
Well, and briefly, Lena Wallen's husband passed away, so we did pass around. Okay.
So that in mind, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So
I'll second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We're adjourned. Thank you.
your fault, Robert.
Yeah, that first.